Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. Time for another show and time for the high schooler to return to school, so everything is a little bit in disarray today. 2 weeks off. That'll do it to you. You forget what your morning routines are. That's what happens to you sitting behind a desk. You forget things, you know, like the weight of a loaded gun. You're all right. Oh, never mind. You don't need to know all of that. But you do need to know that, I don't know. I suppose at some point we may be saying, oh no, the bus is coming. Hurry up, get the hell out the door, or whatever, something like that. It seems like we're under control, though. Pencil case is missing. We'll see if we can find that thing. Very important in the life of a high school, as it turns out. I thought that was something, an item from the distant past, but that carries all sorts of things. Student ID and scientific calculator, plus all the pens and pencils that you actually need for the day. So, all right, we'll recover that. We'll be on our way. Everything will be fine. It's mostly my issue, not his, so we're okay. All right, lunch is ready. Now we turn our attention to small items like, will we have a Speaker of the House elected today? And will they be able to organize the House, adopt rules, make committee assignments, etc.? I think on a technical basis, the answer is yes. I believe we've given the answer that you're going to see later on. And I feel weird about it because I got a really weird feeling about this one. Just because the rest of the world is still sort of stuck in, oh no, they'll vote forever if they can't get 218 votes mode. And again, you don't need that for a number of reasons. I guess the most obvious of which is that it only requires a majority of those present and voting. It's just usually the case that there aren't very many, or usually any, absences on day one, and not for the speaker votes. You know, people show up, they want to get sworn in. You don't want to miss that. But occasionally people do miss that. And of course, veteran hands at being sworn into the House kind of don't care quite as much. Today is a day where new members in particular, of course, they want to be on hand, they want to be sworn in, they get their picture taken, interestingly, they get their ceremonial picture of a fake swearing in, because the real swearing in is just sort of en masse. But then they pose for swearing in pictures. Also, kind of interestingly, very frequently those pictures are posed for in the old Senate chamber because it's, you know, ancient and official looking, but that's, of course, the Senate chamber, and it doesn't make any sense. Plus, it's not even the current Senate chamber. But now they do them all over the place. I don't know. I think that might be a thing of the past. But at any rate, in the speaker's chambers, in the speaker's offices, wherever, they'll find some nice official looking room and take those pictures, and they pose with the Bible or whatever tract it is that they decide they want to be sworn in on. And there have been varying types used in the past. But that picture is usually taken, that usually takes up the better part of the speaker's day. As I told you, this new speaker will get installed, make a brief speech, give the gavel to somebody else as the speaker pro tem and say, you preside over the House, I gotta go. That's for lunching, for fundraising, and for photo taking. You take pictures with all the members who are being sworn in, particularly the new ones, and their families are there, and they hold the Bible or Constitution or Quran or whatever it is that they're being sworn in on. Nobody yet I know of being sworn in on any flying spaghetti monster tracts, or even what you would be using for something like that. But if you don't have their speaker in place, that's going to hold up the game in terms of the pictures. And of course, nobody's going to want their picture taken with a guy who didn't end up being speaker. So that's the biggest disruption that's coming. But the point here is, you know, supporters come into town, family is there, members want to be there as opposed to tied up voting on the floor, particularly members of the Democratic Party who will not really have probably a great say in who gets elected as speaker. I mean, I still think this comes down to, McCarthy's going to be elected speaker, and it's not going to take very long. I figure on the first vote, they're going to do the historic thing where, is for the first time since whatever it is, we're going to a second ballot on the speaker. But I don't know how far beyond second, third ballot it's really going to go. This is very time consuming. Members want to be elsewhere. Democrats know there's really not much opportunity, realistically, to elect anyone any more moderate than McCarthy, and he's not moderate and nowhere near it. Even the people that they offer up as moderates aren't particularly moderate. There's not going to be any, cross the aisle deal for a compromised person from outside of Congress or even from inside of Congress. It's just very unlikely. More likely is that either some number of Republican votes can be lured home by a combination of concessions made by McCarthy, although most concessions have already been made at this point, and the interest in avoiding the embarrassment of a C-SPAN broadcasted prolonged floor fight. That's the new factor in all this. There's never been a multi-ballot fight for the speakership. There's never been a fight at all for the speakership in the age of C-SPAN. It's not C-SPAN that's doing it necessarily, but I do think it gives parties an additional incentive not to air their dirty laundry in public. Just like brokered conventions, that basically went away with widespread broadcast of proceedings from the floor. No one wants that embarrassment. They do everything they can to avoid it. Now, whether or not they can get those votes back on board with Republicans is one thing. Probably not. But then the other easy answer is for Democrats to simply absent themselves, either intentionally in order to get this thing over with or, just coincidentally. I'd really rather be with my family and supporters than voting 5 times for speaker. I'm going to be gone, or I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to get some dinner, something. You time your vote right and you don't even have to be that careful about it. And if there are enough members elsewhere, but all the Republicans are still around because they're the ones who are really doing the electing of the speaker, then you'd be able to do it. Or ultimately, I guess if things really become tiresome and embarrassing, they can do as they did in the 1800s and simply say, all right, well, for these purposes, and now it'll be much easier because you have House precedent for it, much earlier than, the 112th ballot or whatever it was when they did this the first time. They simply declare, you know what, a speaker actually can be elected with a plurality rather than a majority, even a majority of those present and voting. We're just essentially adopting different rules. That must have been, it took them a long time to get around to the first time they did it because there was no precedent for it. And I guess they really wanted to be sure that they could just absolutely not come to a decision and then say, for the sake of saving face and actually beginning the work of this Congress, we're going to go ahead and adopt these new rules. And, okay. This is fun news, by the way. Text from the high schooler that says he's the only one at the bus stop, or maybe there's one other kid and he's worried that he missed it. All right. Well, we'll have to track this. All right. Yeah, well, this will interrupt my flow of thought, and see how this goes. We'll see how we'll track this and see what we do about getting this guy to school. All right, well, at any rate, anyway, it must have been quite a scene for them to decide way back when that they were just going to change the rules, but they knew that option was open to them, and they eventually did take it. Now, of course, we already know the option is open to them. The precedent exists, so they can point to that and they can do so much earlier. And, we'll see how that goes. All right. Well, let's see. I'm going to check on the bus thing. I have this app that's supposed to tell me where the bus is that will tell me, with greater accuracy whether he has perhaps missed it or not. But, well, ordinarily, it would tell me, and it says ordinarily bus pickup is 9:03, and I think he was there on time. The travails of trying to do this while you're actually doing a show, that's really something. But it now says vehicle location unavailable. Now, the whole point, I don't know how much we spent here in in our county school system to install little trackers on all the buses so that you can see everything, and then, vehicle location unavailable. I don't know whether he forgot to hit the switch. Maybe the driver's just as discombobulated as the rest of us coming back to school. I don't know. All right, well, let's see. Also pointed out that the weather is not that bad. He could theoretically walk to school, but it's a bit of a hike. All right, well, we'll see what happens, and have to go from there. You'll all be hearing, I guess, a little bit more about what goes on with the bus, because it's unlikely that I'll be able to keep my mind off of it, and I'll keep getting texts, and I can't do two things at once. All right. Phew. Well, anyway, I think that in the end, you will find that McCarthy is the speaker, and probably not that late today. I don't know how long Democrats will tolerate hanging around waiting for this exercise to be over. And like I said, the likelihood of their, you might ask, why would Democrats cooperate? And it's not even so much a matter of cooperating. Somebody did pose the question to me, well, you'd think that they would hold out for something in trade, right? They're going to make McCarthy the speaker. What are they going to get concession-wise from him on that? And the answer may be literally nothing. I don't know that they really have the leverage to do that. I mean, yes, they could continue to embarrass the Republicans, but to what end? In all likelihood, the compromise replacement for someone like McCarthy would either be someone more conservative and or actually more competent, which might also not be a great idea. Like, that brings up the old sniper story, right? And you can go up and you remember the Army story I was telling from a relative, an in-law relative, whose story from early days of their deployment in Vietnam, right, and saying, arriving to a new unit and saying they're under fire from a sniper, and should I go and see if I can take out that sniper? No, he hasn't hit anybody in days. If we shoot him, they'll send another sniper who might be better, right? So same thing with the speaker. It might be best to just put this incompetent moron with no support from his own party in the speakership than to give a shot at it to somebody who might actually be better, not to mention more conservative. So, all right. You might have reason to keep him in there. There's not going to be, a conservative Democrat elected from inside or outside the House. And there's no moderate Republicans worth electing. I guess, you could throw out names that say, well, that guy wouldn't be so terrible. But I just don't see, like, the rest of the Republican conference coming around. You're going to have to find a lot more votes than you think to make that guy speaker. So my guess is it's eventually going to be him, and that Democrats won't get anything in particular as a result. I mean, there might be some quiet discussion in the back rooms about, well, look, just keep in mind that it was Democrats jumping out of the way that spared you the most embarrassment here. So how about we back off the vampire pedophile talk for a little while? Might that be helpful? It might not be something he can stick by, but, that was never his gig anyway. So my guess is that they just say what we get out of it is we get a functioning House. The House begins its business. People get their committee assignments. There are newly elected Democrats and old hands who want to have their committee assignments nailed down so they can start committee work, that they can adopt a rules package that they can move forward with, is just so that it's just not chaos for very long. That's payoff enough. And, of course, perhaps if anybody actually watches what goes on, when they report on what happened, they'll make a note, perhaps, in their mainstream reporting that it was Democrats jumping out of the way that solved the problem more than anything else. All right, so that's my guess about what happens. I guess it would be exciting to be proved wrong and for there to be a lengthy and dramatic scene going on in the House. But, I don't know exactly how they're going to handle it, and we'll have to wait and see. Just as I am not sure what's happening with the damn bus already. All right. Well, let's see. I guess with break coming up in a little while, I can at least answer him if he texts and says he's about to walk to school. And there's very little I can do to intervene at this point. All right. things to catch up on. There are many. Let's see if we can do the speed round of the news first, and then maybe we can go back to some of the longer read things that I wish I had read and recorded before so that I could just play them for you and then drive my son to school, but no such luck. Let's see. Last night's big news didn't have anything to do with Twitter in particular, although Twitter made a story out of it nonetheless. In the Monday Night Football game, this has a lot of, there's a lot of chatter about this very strange and unsettling situation with one of the players. It was Buffalo and Cincinnati playing, I think, in Cincinnati. One of the Buffalo defenders made a tackle. This is Damar Hamlin is his name, and I guess everybody's now learning his name because it's the big story of the day. And it, making a relatively routine tackle on one of the wide receivers from Cincinnati, but looked to me like he basically got the guy's helmet in his chest and got a straight on shot right in the sternum there. And then so he makes the tackle, and it all appears to be well. They're all padded and everything. And then he gets up immediately from making the tackle, as one would normally. And it was very scary looking. In the replays, I'm sure you've seen it if you have any interest in football at all. And the guy took a step or two and then just collapsed flat, laid straight back down, boom, on his back. Not laid down, he fell, collapsed on his back. And I didn't see the rest of it, and they weren't, thankfully they weren't replaying it and putting out the video all over the place, at least initially, but they actually had to, a scene like that, players gather around, are you okay? They wave the medics on, the medical staff comes on, and, they're with the smelling salts and trying to revive something. This time, though, they're doing CPR on this guy. And I guess they had also they have all the equipment that you would use to revive somebody whose heart had stopped, who was in cardiac arrest. What do they call? What's the initials that they use for it now? I don't even know, but I guess the defibrillator. And it's extensive CPR, and he left in an ambulance. It was very traumatic to everybody who watched it. And there's a lot to talk about that's wrapped up in that. And I don't know, it was very weird because the football commentators, well, first of all, they put the commentators in the same position I'm in now. I can't do the show. I have to talk about my son missing the bus. They had to talk about something about which they had no real news. They didn't know what the developments were. But they had to fill time. And I guess ESPN, who was carrying the game, didn't have anything else to cover lined up, and they didn't have anybody, I guess, at the anchor desk either, because they thought they were going to be involved in a football game for another hour, and they had to, tell somebody, come in early, put on a suit, come and sit at the anchor desk, because the guys in the stadium don't have anything more to say. They've been saying for an hour that their prayers are with the Hamlin family and the Buffalo Bills community, and yada yada, and trying to find sensitive ways of talking about it. It was a real show, though. In that they also, of course, were used to seeing somebody be injured and even leaving the game in an ambulance and then resuming the game. So for a while, I guess nobody was sure what was going to happen, and the coaches are trying to get their teams back and focused and get them ready to play on, because that's football. You smash a guy, knock him out, move him, and start playing again. But this was somehow obviously pretty different. And then I don't know. It seemed like the players were just never going to regain their composure, and they didn't want to, and they didn't want to continue with the game. But the officialdom, I guess, had to puzzle it out. How are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? What's the rule for? We'll just suspend the game, and then what? Do we make it up later? What do we do? And so all of this happening at the same time in real time, and it was very confusing. And the poor announcers in the stadium to call the game have nothing to say, and they don't want to offend anybody, and it was a very bizarre situation all in all. So I'm glad that they suspended the game. That was the only sensible thing to do. But then it was interesting watching the commentators that they brought in at the anchor desk talking about it. They're talking about it as though it was some great mystery, like some medical anomaly had just happened, that some hidden health defect, perhaps some latent health defect had come to the surface just at the wrong place, wrong time. And that's what was it. But I mean, I don't know. I thought it was pretty obvious. If you get a solid shot to the sternum, you damage your heart. You can stop the heartbeat. You hit it at the right moment in your heartbeat and you just stop the heart, crack the sternum, bruise the muscle of the heart, and cardiac arrest. I mean, what we witnessed there was very interesting. Also, people say, well, danger's inherent in the game and da-da-da. Well, I think what we got to see there was people's bodies get beaten over a series, over years of playing football, and usually the damage doesn't make itself apparent until much later and out of our sight. And here we just watched somebody get footballed to the brink of death right in front of us, and all the damage came down and was done all at once in one spot in one place in front of our eyes. And everybody was like forced to acknowledge, you could pretty easily get speared in the chest by a helmet and have your heart stop. Sure, it doesn't happen very often, and that's great. But, football players are damaging themselves for your benefit, for your entertainment for years on end. And they've been telling you that for years, and everybody's still kind of been in denial about it. So I don't know. It was really something to watch it all happen all at once and watch people try to react to it as though that wasn't what they were watching. So, I don't know, maybe a wake-up call. Maybe there's some padding change or rules change that they think that they can make to avoid this happening again. But, perhaps not. Now, Justice just chimes in, because Justice is an old football player himself. That is to say, it's been a while since he's played football. Not that he's an old man like, me or the rest of them. But, yes, he's commenting just now, as a matter of fact. I saw a kid on an opposing team in high school go into cardiac arrest after a big hit back in the early 70s. I imagine, maybe it's unrelated, but I don't know, you watch like kung fu movies, right? That in combat like that, a straight hit to the sternum can do that. There are points in the body where, vital organs are extraordinarily vulnerable. And, I don't know, my younger son, who's a bit of a martial arts enthusiast himself, seeing the scene and saying, well, yeah, if you get hit like that straight on in the sternum like that, that will happen. It can happen. Similarly, if you get hit in the liver, your body will shut down. Just because of its position in the body, all the other organs can shift, he says, a little easier. I don't know whether it's medically true or not, but that's the thought that he's got in his mind, is that somehow the liver, you get hit, it ruptures like that, and then the body's reaction to it is kind of an instant shutdown. I don't know, but it seems like anybody who has seen those sorts of things, those movies even, would tell you that that's the story that they tell, that there are certain organs in the body or places in the body that can be targeted that can turn you off pretty quick. And if you're running around with a hammer on your head, eventually you're going to hit one of those on an opposing player. Very disturbing, though. And, I don't know. For some reason now I'm drawing a parallel in there with, just in terms of like weird things that we always knew could happen, but we very rarely see on television, but really reveal a lot when you do see them for the first time live. And I guess you might see that in the House of Representatives as well, although they won't be wearing any padding, and for the most part, no planned contact between the teams. But, we've seen that in the South Korean legislature in the past, and even here in the United States of America. It usually involves a cane and fighting over slavery, but you never know what might develop here today. All right, so anyway, that's the news, and so we have to wait and see. I think there's no word on Hamlin's recovery so far. I think he's still in critical condition and maybe unconscious and sedated, and I guess that's the standard procedure at this point, and you just got to give him rest and see how quickly he can recover. And then you got to wonder whether the guy ever wants to play football again. For some people, that's their lifelong dream, and they've done nothing else, and they still have things to accomplish, and they want to get back on the field. Others say it's just not worth it. We'll see which direction this goes. It was very interesting to watch the outpouring of interest and grief in it, too. The players, of course, were shaken. Everybody in the stadium, too. But Twitter, cesspool that it is, apparently used the opportunity to say that his medical condition was, in fact, not being pummeled in the heart by a helmet, but rather that he was vaccinated and the vaccine was killing him. I think just the other day, John Stockton, former basketball star and coach, I believe, I can't remember. I didn't track the career of John Stockton. But anyway, I remember the name. And he apparently has recently made the claim that that was his claim, thousands of professional athletes have died from the vaccine. And so he no doubt was capitalizing on last night's events too. That's Twitter for you. Speaking of which, speaking of propaganda efforts, I became aware of a warning. I don't know whether it's got any basis in reality, but I guess somebody had the brilliant idea on the wingnut right to say, Mastodon's growth and migration from Twitter to Mastodon now threatens Twitter, and that means it threatens my new hero Elon Musk, and so therefore I have to do something. So now they're circulating the rumor that, and I guess Human Events magazine is the one that's trumpeting this both on Twitter and I guess in their own publication, the claim that that they say the vast majority of content on Mastodon is in fact, they say, child porn. And so therefore it's a haven for groomers and pedophiles, just like we told you, even though what that usually means is, I guess that's what's happening over at Twitter these days, because every Republican accusation is a confession. This one pretty brazen, not very imaginative though. Anyway, we'll be back after I check on what happened with the bus.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, bad news. The bus still hasn't arrived, and I guess he's just going to have to walk. That might be the best, might be for the best today. Hang on a second. I got to check in and make sure. Might be the best we can do. So sadly, he'll have to walk today, but it's in the 50s. It's a nice, cool, brisk day, and so it won't be so overwhelmingly hot, and it won't be bitterly cold. In another day, in the depths of winter, I might have to try and figure out what to do about something like this. But not too much else we can do. I guess if it was bitterly cold out, I would say, stand by for some music, and I would cut off, and I'd alert Justice, and he'd turn on some music, and I'd go and drive him to school. But, this is, let it be a lesson to you. He held out longer. He knows when the bus is supposed to come, but the bus usually comes late, and they build that into their calculus, and they leave late, and then it turns out the bus comes on time, and then they miss it. So, all right. It's not that bad of a walk. All right, so we'll be worrying about him and we'll be keeping him in our thoughts. But okay, we already used that phrase earlier today for Damar Hamlin, so not quite the same situation. But I am distracted. All right, let's go back over to the other stories I wanted to share with you. There are a couple. First of all, let me throw out a couple of weird gun fail stories. Of course, it is celebratory gunfire season, and that brings the usual problems. New Year's Eve, lots of stories about things just like that, just as you expected. There was a story out of Philadelphia, a woman outside ringing a bell on her front porch to celebrate the New Year and caught a celebratory gunfire, as they call it, stray bullet. It's not really stray. It was just abandoned, basically. But not surprising there that would have happened again. And let's see, did I open this one up? I think it's still in. I was trying to send it around on Mastodon and to credit our good friend SFDB, who collects these things. But of course, Mastodon, here's something about the quote tweet function. Mastodon is missing out. I probably am posting about, 60 to 70% less on Mastodon than I used to on Twitter, merely for lack of the quote tweet functionality. Ordinarily, SFDB would collect this thing and note that it's something that happens in our NRA world, and then I would quote tweet that and add the gunfail hashtag so that I could, keep the running total, the running catalogs of it via the hashtag. But now that functionality is not available. So if I'm sitting there on my phone and I see something from SFDB and I want to properly credit it, I have to grab the text of the toot from SFDB, then grab a link to SFDB's. Well, I mean, I guess I can just add it at the end, because if I just put in at SFDB, the app will fill in the rest of the Mastodon account there. But then I have to grab the link to the article itself as well, and there's 3 trips back and forth to cut and paste text into my own Mastodon toot, which I don't think on my phone, I don't think there's a functionality for keeping a draft in a folder anywhere. So it becomes very complicated. In fact, virtually impossible to do on your phone. So you got to go and find a computer and sit down and do that. Anyway, there's so much engineering involved in giving credit to the original messenger. I can't be talking about toots and tutors. It seems so ridiculous. But in order to preserve that credit, but also preserve add the gunfail hashtag and any other commentary, it's impossible. The quote tweet made it possible, and now that content is just not getting boosted, because it doesn't make any particular sense for me. I mean, I guess I could boost the content just because it's content everybody should see, and that's what Mastodon people really want. And, then credit does go to the right person, but then I lose the ability to compile how frequently this happens under the gunfail hashtag, and why shouldn't I have that? So it's very annoying. But at any rate, that's the story. Let me see if I can open it up in a browser on my phone so that I can read you the basics of the story. 87-year-old woman in Philadelphia hit by celebratory gunfire while ringing in the new year. I don't know. You don't really need to hear that much more about how it happened, other than the fact that it did happen. But shot in the shoulder, and I guess recovering. I don't know. You know how it is. Someone gets shot, if they're not shot in the head and they don't die immediately on the scene, they say expected to make a full recovery. But an 87-year-old woman getting shot in the shoulder, no joke. I don't know about any full recovery on this one. We'll wait and see. There's other ones around in circulation. There was one that was very oddly worded from, where is this? I don't even know what state we're looking at here. Let me see. There we go. Lawrence Township, Michigan. So in Michigan, 2 people were shot and killed after a man fired his gun in celebration during a New Year's Eve party on Sunday in Van Buren County, according to investigators. This is so oddly worded. They go so far out of their way to say, a guy accidentally shot and killed 2 people in a party inside. It wasn't that he went outside and fired his gun in the air and the bullets went somewhere and he doesn't know where, but later there were reports that 2 people were struck and killed, which would be enormously unlikely, thankfully, but can happen. But I don't know how, they have such difficulty tracing those shots. I don't know how they would have brought it back to him. This guy, I don't know whether he did it inside, whether he was just taking his gun out to wave it around, or he was on his way outside to do some celebratory gunfire, but accidentally fired inside. He just blatantly, accidentally killed 2 people at the party. And, they just don't know how to handle it. I mean, a guy is just murdering people at a party, but they're fumbling over themselves to try to come up with a gun-friendly way of talking about it. Right. 2 people were shot and killed after a man fired his gun in celebration during a New Year's Eve party. A person called 911. Everything's passive voice now in this. Not just the gun stuff. Even calling 911 happens this way. A person called 911. 911 was called by a person. We don't know exactly how it happened. To report a man was shot in the head and a second man was shot multiple times in the back. This is starting to sound like maybe not such an accident. Where did it happen? In 57,000 block of 60th Avenue in Lawrence Township, if you know where that is. 12:05 a.m. Sunday, so you're late even. The call it took 5 minutes to make the call. This, according to a news release from the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office, deputies determined a 62-year-old man began discharging his firearm to celebrate during a New Year's Eve party, where fireworks were also being discharged, investigators said. Okay. A 40-year-old man who was shot in the head was dead when deputies arrived, investigators said. The second shooting victim, a 35-year-old man, was found responsive. They usually say found unresponsive, but found responsive before he died at the hospital, deputies said. The 62-year-old suspect was arrested on multiple counts of reckless discharge of a firearm causing death. Like, come on. That guy murdered 2 people. I know it wasn't intentional, but I mean, that's just manslaughter, right? Well, what is this reckless discharge of a firearm causing death? Come on. You arrest the guy for manslaughter. What's wrong with that? But we have to protect the guns. We go out of our way legally to protect the guns. A criminal complaint will be submitted to the Van Buren County Prosecutor's Office for review for criminal charges. That's the end of the coverage. I got no more to say about that one. And, by the way, there's also a link to another story related. Man shot and killed minutes after midnight on New Year's Day in Grand Rapids. Not sure if that's just a straight up murder or minutes after midnight that bullet came down and killed him. We just don't know who did it because it was celebratory gunfire. But these stories are from all over. You know the drill. Now, here's one that you didn't know the drill on, but did happen and shouldn't, but happens because we now say, I did see somebody say the other day tweeting out, and I think it might have been a tweet rather than a toot, that I guess on January 1st when some new state laws went into effect, now more than half the states allow for permitless carry of firearms. You don't have to register. You don't have to pass any classes. You don't have to get a permit. You just, you buy a gun like you'd buy anything else. Gumballs, Nerf guns, if you want to stick to the gun theme, or for that matter, bells to ring on your front porch for New Year's Eve rather than firing your weapons. You can buy a bell or a gun. Either kind of noisemaker is available to you now. And that, of course, puts the weapons in the hands of people less than qualified to carry them, but it's your constitutional right, and so you do things like this. Let's get to the original from down in Georgia, DeKalb County. A man who took his car to get serviced at a DeKalb County tire shop on Saturday found himself behind bars. We don't know how that happened. I was just trying to get my car tires changed, and now I'm behind bars because police say he shot and killed an employee who was moving his vehicle. Police say 30-year-old Quadarius McDowell opened fire on the auto employee because he thought his car was being stolen, even though the worker was only moving the car from one part of the tire shop property to another. Like, you bring in your car, you park it here, you say, I need 4 new tires. The guy goes out and takes the car and moves it from the front of the shop where you parked it to the area where they put the car on a lift and lift it up so they can change the tires. He's stealing my car. No, he's fixing your car. I'll ask no questions because I already have the gun available to me. Pow, pow, pow. The guy is dead. I'm a murderer. And I'm not getting my tires on top of it all. I mean, will they service that guy's tires? I don't know. Authorities were called to the Tires Plus at 577 DeKalb Industrial Way in the Scottsdale area of unincorporated DeKalb just before 1:30 p.m. When they arrived, they found Daniel Gordon, 24, suffering from a gunshot wound. By the way, that's not just throwaway language. Like, we found him unresponsive or found him suffering from a gunshot wound. He was suffering, and then he was dead. Because that guy was wrong about what was going on. And he had a handheld instant death machine available to him thanks to new laws that say, sure, anybody can buy basically a hole punch that can pound a hole through the skull of a human being, and you can carry it with you wherever you want. And anybody that you think deserves to have a hole pounded in their skull and a bolt embedded in their brain or their heart or any of their organs, you just go ahead and do that, and we'll figure out afterwards whether you were justified or not. And, maybe lives change, maybe lives end. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. That's the handheld instant death machine code, and it's okay. Constitutionally, it is a death pact, a suicide pact, and everybody basically has agreed that anybody at any time can punch a hole through any part of your body they want to, and maybe the law will catch up with them later if it wasn't the right thing to do. So there you go. Gordon, now dead, an employee at Tires Plus, has died from his injuries at the hospital. Investigators said Gordon was moving McDowell's car to the tire shop's business parking lot, but they said McDowell thought he was trying to steal it. So there you go. Police said McDowell fired multiple shots at the car, fatally wounding Gordon. It's a good shot, so there's something. Police said McDowell ran away after the shooting because he's a responsible gun owner, but officers were able to find him and arrest him. They probably said, whose car was that? McDowell? Here's his address. So they arrested him. No other information on the incident was released. McDowell was booked into the DeKalb County Jail. And, I have questions that under certain circumstances, I could see somebody saying, but I thought the car was being stolen. And people saying, yeah, you're right. That's a stand your ground case. And, it's unfortunate, but that's the price we pay for freedom, instant death. And so we're just going to have to let you go. And I think that situation that I'm thinking of is a white guy doing the shooting rather than someone of color, perhaps. And I don't know exactly what was happening. I'm making a perhaps racially charged, as the newspapers would say, assumption, but Quadarius is not a frequently used name, I guess. And so maybe I'm wrong about this. I have no proof whatsoever. And of course, even in this day and age, even a white guy can probably shoot somebody in such a way that even cops will say, now hold on a second, that just doesn't seem right. So we can't be sure. But anyway, that's just bad news all around, and it's because handheld instant death machines are available out of gumball machines these days. So that's just the price of freedom. And one more price of freedom, just since we're on this subject, thought I'd waste a segment on this one. This news also reaching me by various social media. A heavily armed man caused panic at a supermarket. But did he break the law? No, probably not. New York Times reporting this one, but I'm sure it was reported by the local paper first. In states with permissive gun laws, the subheader says, police and prosecutors have limited tools at their disposal when a heavily armed individual sows fear or panic in public. And in this case, in Publix. Publix, the supermarket. That's right. And this happened in Atlanta 2 days after a gunman killed 10 people at a Colorado grocery store leaving many Americans on high alert, Rico Marley was arrested as he emerged from the bathroom at a Publix supermarket in Atlanta. He was wearing body armor and carrying 6 loaded weapons, 4 handguns in his jacket pockets, and in a guitar bag, a semi-automatic rifle and a 12-gauge shotgun. Now, you might say to yourself, that seems like a see something, say something situation, right? So they came and they, I guess, arrested the guy, and he's in Georgia. He's like, I'm just exercising my Second Amendment rights. You may have just caught me before my killing spree, but I know enough to say, no, you have to let me go to have another killing spree because I didn't shoot anybody. You have to wait until I murder. Before then, you can't bother me. You can't even ask me if I have a permit for those guns. 1, because there's no such thing as a permit anymore. And 2, because in Georgia, it's supposedly illegal for the police to ask you if you have a permit, which is incredible. Incredible. But, white guys don't want to be bothered and made to answer for things. So the law is that. And if you're not white, they arrest you and make you answer those questions. And if you are white, you say, I have the right not to tell you. And they believe it. Well, anyway, moments earlier, an Instacart delivery driver had seen something and said something. He had alerted a store employee after seeing Mr. Marley in the bathroom, along with the AR-15 style rifle, which was propped up against the wall, because that's the safe way to handle it. A grand jury indictment later described what had come next: panic, terror, and the evacuation of the Publix. Mr. Marley, then 22, was arrested without incident that day in March of 2021. This is being reported now. It's a contemporary news story, but the happenings, obviously, were in the past. His lawyer, Charles Brandt, noted that he had not made any threats or fired any shots and had legally purchased his guns, which is not saying much because, like I said, you can get them in a gumball machine. Mr. Marley did not violate Georgia law, Mr. Brandt said. He was, quote, just being a person, doing what he had the right to do. And they're correct about that because they've granted that right, stupidly enough. Indeed, Mr. Marley's arrest kicked off a long and as yet unresolved legal odyssey in which the criminal justice system waffled over what it could charge him with and whether to set him free. To just do it again later, I guess. Clearly, visiting the grocery store with a trove of guns had frightened people, but was it illegal? The episode, and others like it, speaks to a uniquely American quandary. In states with permissive gun laws, the police and prosecutors have limited tools at their disposal when a heavily armed individual's mere presence in a public space sows fear or even panic. And you don't have much time to decide because, remember, it is an instant death machine, right? Or at least can be. The question of how to handle such situations has been raised most often in recent years in the context of political protests, where the open display of weapons has led to concerns about intimidation, the squelching of free speech, where's Ross Barkin on that one, or worse. But it may become a more frequent subject of debate in the wake of a landmark Supreme Court decision in June, which expanded Americans' rights to arm themselves in public while limiting states' ability to set their own regulations. Because, of course, Washington knows best, all of a sudden, for conservatives. The ruling also affirmed the principle of allowing states and local governments to ban guns in sensitive places. As examples, it cited legislative assemblies, polling places, and courthouses. But now, of course, that's going to be churches and supermarkets and malls and movie theaters if you really want to do something about this. But no. You don't. But the High Court left much open for interpretation. A wave of litigation is going to confront the courts with questions about what, for example, makes a restriction on guns in schools and government buildings different than in museums or on public transit. Jacob D. Charles, a professor and gun law expert at Pepperdine Caruso School of Law, wrote in a recent blog post. That's true. Events like the one involving Mr. Marley, while difficult to quantify, are extreme examples of a problem already bedeviling the police and prosecutors, sometimes from the moment an armed person is spotted in public. But all but 3 states allow for the open carry of handguns, long guns, or both, and in many, there is little the police can do. I'm sure they'll come to the example, but if they don't, I can tell you one. Chuck Wexler, the executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum, a bipartisan law enforcement policy group, said police officers sometimes had mere seconds to determine whether a person with a gun either legally has the right or he's a madman or both, right? And that's interesting too, because we were constantly hearing about the police firing on, motorists and others for what seems like less than sensible reasons, but then they say, I feared for my life, right? I had a split second to make the decision about whether he was going to attack me. I thought he had a gun, or I could see he had a gun. Sometimes I thought he had a gun one's the most incredible. And I made the split second decision. Now, these are trained police. What are regular civilians supposed to do? Like, you have not only seconds to make a decision, but there's no decision to be made. You're just like, I immediately, whatever. I thought I was going to die. And guess what? I was, because this was a lunatic. But police who are trained and who have bulletproof vests available to them, Kevlar vests, they don't always wear them, but sometimes they're wearing body armor and Kevlar vests and are armed and are trained, et cetera, are still given tremendous leeway that in, a split second decision, they did what they had to do and they fired and they end up killing somebody who turned out to be unarmed. But the rest of us have to just wait and see whether we get killed or not before we can officially alert the police and the police can actually do anything. But I don't know. It's interesting. They keep it in cop terms. For the average cop, the story continues, walking the street in America, it's a huge dilemma, knowing there have been countless active shooter situations, Mr. Wexler said. Why cops don't speak out more and say this is insane, I don't know. But they don't, because they love guns. Prosecutors initially went all in on Mr. Marley's case, charging him with 11 felonies, 5 counts of criminal attempt to commit a felony, and 6 counts of possession of a weapon, quote, during commission of or attempt to commit certain felonies. They invent some good charges down there. An arresting officer said in an affidavit that when Mr. Marley had put on his anti-ballistic armor in the public's bathroom and placed the handguns with rounds in the chambers into his pockets, he had taken a, quote, substantial step of the crime of aggravated assault, which is a felony. That was the attempt there. In July of 2021, Judge Debbie Ann Rickman of Fulton County Magistrate Court denied Mr. Marley bond, determining that he posed a significant danger to the community. But court records show that the charges were dismissed in February. Mr. Marley was released from jail after 10 months, only to be rebooked in May, this time after being indicted by a grand jury on 10 lesser counts of reckless conduct, a misdemeanor. The indictment says that Mr. Marley was loading and displaying his AR-15 in the restroom and that he left it unattended. He pleaded not guilty to the charges in August and remains in custody. Mr. Brandt, his lawyer, said he had not filed a new bond motion on his client's behalf because Mr. Marley was homeless and did not have a family or friends to stay with. Now, he had several $1,000s worth of guns and body armor, but okay. We're talking about, it seems pretty obvious that we were, that close to a real situation here. And there's nothing we can do about it because the good old boys have given themselves the right to, I want to be able to carry AR-15s with me to Starbucks to intimidate all the, riffraff and liberals, and I want to own them. And now here they have somebody, a person of color who's homeless, who's scary to them and to me because he's armed. And there's nothing they can do about it because they've written dumb laws for themselves. I don't know when they're going to wake up to this. John R. Monroe, a defense lawyer and the vice president of a gun rights group called Georgia Second Amendment, is not involved in Mr. Marley's case, but from the outside, he said it seems baseless. All the guy did was be in a store with guns, he said. I go into Kroger with a gun and I don't expect to be arrested for reckless conduct when I do that. Based on the information from the case, he didn't do anything that would even remotely constitute reckless conduct. And shame on the state for even prosecuting him for that, because he imagines himself being in this situation. But I bet he doesn't imagine himself going into the bathroom and loading his weapons and racking them and getting ready for who knows what and putting on body armor. Come on. But still, he's so sensitive about the guns. You can't do this to me. I never want this to happen to me, a white guy. So he's actually willing to say, usually they just sort of get gimmitarian about it and say, well, arrest the black guys, of course, but just not me. But sometimes I guess they can see the value of even a black guy can be defended by a white guy from Georgia if it's about guns. except if they're already dead, in which case, he was probably a criminal. He was no angel. Taking out the rifle in the men's room would have most likely violated the law in Illinois, Florida, and California, where open carry is banned, Mr. Charles said. But states with more lenient gun laws have struggled with scenarios similar to the one involving Mr. Marley. In February, a man named Guido Herrera was discovered at the Galleria Mall in Houston, a few yards from a youth dance competition. Remember this one? We talked about this one. Wearing a spiked leather mask. I don't even know what that's about. And carrying a Bible and an AR-15 style rifle. Had it been a Quran, obviously it's a crime. See, that's the difference. What book does he have? That's the real crime. An off-duty police officer working as a security guard was alerted to his presence and tackled him. No gun involved. Mr. Herrera was found to have more than 120 rounds of ammunition with him, as well as a semi-automatic handgun holstered in his waistband. Not holstered, stuck in his waistband. He was charged with disorderly conduct, a misdemeanor that under Texas law includes knowingly displaying a firearm in public in a manner calculated to alarm. See what they're doing here? A jury found him guilty, and he was given a 6-month jail sentence. Prosecutors were openly frustrated. His circumstance kind of fell into gaps. Barbara Musset, a lawyer with the Harris County District Attorney's Office, said at Mr. Herrera's sentencing, according to the Houston Chronicle. I mean, it did fall into the gaps, but these gaps are obvious and well known. We haven't gotten to this one yet, but maybe they make mention of one of the very early on subjects or instances of this in it was Colorado Springs, right? Somebody spotted doing an open carry or what we now call an open carry walk down the street in Colorado Springs, I think, and people calling the cops and the cops saying there's nothing we can do about it until he starts shooting people, and then getting calls back. Well, now he's shooting people. All right. That gap is well known, but Texas has chosen to do nothing to address it. They just figure, we'll wait until people start getting shot. Then maybe we'll talk about it. Prosecutors were frustrated. Let's see. He took advantage of some of the technicalities in the law. He had the right to have a firearm. That's true. And ultimately, this was the only charge that we could get him on. In an interview, Armin Merjanian, a lawyer for Mr. Herrera, called his client a proud owner of firearms living in Texas. Yay! Adding that Mr. Herrera brought the rifle into the mall because he was worried about it being stolen from his car. That's legit. There's lots more here, but you get the picture? All right, well, maybe we switch over subjects after the break and after fretting a little more about my son. Poor kid. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It looks like the rest of it is pretty much what you would expect, and I don't think they ever... Oh, yeah, did they get around to the Colorado thing? I do see a mention of Colorado here. Oh, yeah, okay. How do they get around to this? Not all such cases have ended peacefully. In 2015, a woman in Colorado Springs called 911 after seeing a man in her neighborhood with a gun. The dispatcher reportedly explained to her that Colorado was an open carry state. Within minutes, the man went on a shooting spree, killing 3 people. Mr. Brandt, the lawyer for Mr. Marley, said his client might suffer from mental illness and was awaiting a formal diagnosis. He said Mr. Marley had attempted suicide during his first 10-month jail stint. Mr. Brandt also offered an explanation for Mr. Marley's conduct that day. He had acquired the guns and the body armor, Mr. Brandt said, because he had felt threatened by someone in his neighborhood. On the day of the arrest, he had hoped to take his guns to a nearby shooting range, but first had to run some errands, which included a stop at the grocery store. Mr. Marley did not have a car, Mr. Brandt said, which is why he was carrying the guns around with him. While in the public's men's room, Mr. Brandt said Mr. Marley had taken out some of the weapons, including the rifle, to clean them after discovering that some guacamole he had bought had caused a mess inside the bag. Charles Russell, the Instacart driver who came upon Mr. Marley in the men's room, told police that at one point he heard clicking sounds from a stall that sounded to him like someone was loading firearms. They were. In a recent interview, Mr. Russell, 27, said that he had the Colorado massacre on his mind at the time. He recalled thinking, if I don't do anything, then I'm afraid of what will happen. By the way, just to be clear, he had the second Colorado massacre on his mind, not the 2015 open carry, oh, we can't do anything massacre on his mind, but the 10 people in a grocery store massacre on his mind. Anyway, so, by the way, in a statement to the New York Times, Fannie T. Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, who is usually busy with the voting case in the Trump election meddling case, which, so she covers the Fulton County, which covers most of Atlanta, and she said her office had taken a hard look at the case but had not found provable felonies under Georgia law. So I guess if they ever find provable felonies under Georgia law against Donald Trump, you'll see what kind of bar has to be cleared. You can't arrest a guy and figure out a crime to charge him with if he's racking his weapons in the bathroom of the Publix, but we did get Trump, so... All right. Well, that's yet to be seen. Anyway, I don't know. Just kind of amazing and a constant problem here in the United States. I just thought I'd make you alert to the fact that it's happening all over the place. In other news, on stories that we have to catch up on, George Santos's press secretary has resigned. I have here in front of me the report or the write-up of it on Crooks and Liars. Let's see if there's any information available and where the original info and reporting comes from. In the meantime, George Santos' press secretary has resigned, according to Conover Kennard at Crooks and Liars. Republican Congressman-elect George Santos appears to have mental issues after revelations that he fabricated large chunks of his life, and even when George apologized, it left more questions than answered. It was a half-assed apology, it says here. I'm taking a word for it from Conover here. He said things like, my sins here are embellishing my resume. I'm sorry. He's not really taking responsibility for it. But according to Politico, that's the original source on this, I guess his press secretary is done. Here's the quote from Politico. In a sign, Santos' standing is growing increasingly shaky. His campaign press secretary, I don't know whether he was going to continue over to Congress or not. He resigned on Thursday. That might not mean that much. The press secretary, Gabby Lipsky, had been expecting to join the congressman-elect's staff in D.C. That's the answer to that. Before she stepped down, according to a person familiar with the matter. So also in the news here, and also, I guess, taken from the Politico report, is that Representative Richie Torres, representing the Bronx, announced on Thursday that he is introducing legislation that would require candidates for federal office to disclose their employment, educational, and military history under oath. False statements would be punishable as perjury. And he's come out with what he's calling the Santos Act, which maybe I can open up the article quickly and get the answer of what is the horrible acronym that he's put together on this. As I recall, it was like stop another, something, da, da, da. It was crazy, but, it was fun and clever. And, here we go. Let's see. The Santos Act. Does he say what it is here? The stop another non-truthful office seeker. That's pretty bad. That's good and bad, like a groaner of a pun. All right. So anyway, we have that news. There was another report on the Santos situation from the New York Times the other day, which might not be worth spending a whole segment reading all the way through, but the new revelation was that at some point he had, I think it's down at the bottom of this story here somewhere, was the report that I guess the reporters had been talking to a former boyfriend of George Santos who moved in with him, and there was a whole situation here. Let's see. It starts down at the bottom this way. Those who knew him recalled that Mr. Santos had long been a follower of Republican politics, and that he railed against Hillary Clinton and Bill de Blasio, who was then the mayor of New York. Now, at this point, of course, as it turns out, Santos is working and living in Florida, but, very angry about the mayor of New York for some reason. Anyway, one who was close to Mr. Santos was Pedro Villarva. Mr. Villarva met Mr. Santos in 2014. It's a while ago. But when he was 18 and Mr. Santos was 26, not not too bad, but whatever. Anyway, 18 is 18, but, anyway, I'll tell you the rest of the story so that you can see why I'm a little concerned. So he met him when he was 18. No big deal, right? Mr. Villarva found him charming and sweet. They dated for a few months before Mr. Santos suggested that they move in together. Mr. Villarva said he felt on top of the world, even if he said he did find himself footing many of the bills, which is a little bit odd. And also somebody else noting along the way, outside of the context of this article, he was married to a woman at that time, which again raises questions about what this is all about. And if it turns out to be that he was trying to help somebody avoid immigration laws, that'll only be even better for the Republicans to try and justify that one. But he asks this young man to move in with him. So he's 26. The other guy is 18. Move in with me. He is legally entitled to be able to do that at 18. I did also see somebody else pointing out, 18 is 18, but if the shoe was on the other foot, if this were a Democrat involved in this, they would be howling about him as being a groomer, that he met this guy. Did you really meet when he was 18, or did you meet him when he was 17 and you talked him into it and then had him move in the day he turned 18 or something like that? But they would absolutely have framed this story as grooming. No doubt about it. But, he's a Republican, so it's somehow okay on the up and up. Total egalitarian approach to everything. But anyway, so he was on top of the world, even if he did find himself footing many of the bills. He's 18. What's he footing the bills for? He used to say he would get money from Citigroup. He was an investor, Mr. Villarva recalled. One day it's one thing, one day it's another thing. He never actually went to work, he said. This is Mr. Villarva talking about Santos. He never worked anywhere. Wow. Things began to unravel between the two men in early 2015, Mr. Villarva said, after Mr. Santos surprised him with tickets to Hawaii. Why would that unravel things, right? Because the tickets to Hawaii turned out not to exist. Like pretty much everything else. You'd want to leave at this point. You're paying all the bills. He never goes to work. He just comes up with a different excuse each day. Don't worry, I'll make it up to you with a trip to Hawaii. Okay, fine. But the trip to Hawaii doesn't exist. Around the same time, he said he discovered that his cell phone was missing, and he believed Mr. Santos had pawned it. Wow. The betrayal prompted him to plug Mr. Santos' name into a search engine where he found that Mr. Santos was wanted by Brazilian police. I woke up in the morning, I packed my stuff and all in trash bags, and I called my father and I left, he said. All right. Way to go, Pedro. This is a smart guy, finally. Looking back, Mr. Villarva said he was young and gullible. You can understand that. He wanted to believe Mr. Santos' many stories and believe in the life that they shared. Today, he is worried about the impact Mr. Santos might have as an elected official. I would be scared to have someone like that in charge, having so much power in his hands, he said. And that's actually how the article closes out. Well, that's the most interesting new bit about it. So I'm glad we skipped down to get that. But, his story is just deteriorating daily, but he'll be sworn in today. I wonder whether anybody will make any attempt to stop him or object in any way and ask him to stand aside. That's something that they can do, and I'm not certain that Democratic members are aware of that, but you can find a way to step out and blurt it out and say, ask the chair that Mr. Santos stand aside pending further investigation. They will probably reject your request and overrule it and just rule you out of order. And you can appeal the ruling of the chair and you can waste a little more time. Why not draw out the dramatics today? Ultimately we know how this one comes down, but I don't see there's any downside to making an issue of it and, wasting another hour having a vote to overrule you. But you're in the right here. It's a question of whether or not anybody understands that that's something that they can do, and very frequently it's just not the case. Maybe people made inquiries in the days leading up to this when it became obvious that something had to be done and prepared themselves for it. We'll see. But we won't see until noon when they call the session to order. All right, let's see. There's lots of other stories, and I'm wondering if maybe the thing to do is collect some of those, or do we use the fact that the deck is clear to return to some of those long read pieces. Like, I think I would like to return to the rest of that Elise Stefanik thing, because she may play a large role certainly in the next Congress as the number 3 Republican, and she may, it is said, if things really go haywire with the speaker vote, she may want to make an end around Scalise and try to offer herself up as some sort of compromise candidate for the speakership. And so perhaps, we ought to find out more about her before it's too late. So let's do that. I'll see if I can figure out where we left off here by scrolling down and scanning what we have read. I think we got around to, we got to this I am Ultra MAGA part. Did we get to the next section? Yes, from Harvard to the Hill, where this is where I really thought it became interesting, and we were telling everybody, or reading everybody the setup here of, like the Ivy-educated Republican Senator Josh Hawley or Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Ms. Stefanik has succeeded in the Trump era in part by turning on the kind of people, there we are, and institutions that made her. Isn't that interesting? The same words, just emphasized differently, completely different meaning. Anyway, yes, so she was very hopped up on the Institute of Politics, and that they said here we all wanted to be around power, and all we had to do was decide what we were going to do with that access. That was instead not Stefanik herself, but someone who was an acquaintance and contemporary of hers who became an environmental lawyer, Naomi Agis, or Ages, or Agis. We were never sure how to pronounce that. Right. So then the Institute tried with mixed success to weld the students' natural ambition to some notion of the public good. Ms. Stefanik fell in early with the mostly left-leaning crowd. 4 people who knew her at the time said she identified as a supporter of abortion and gay rights, though another college friend said no, she was actually always pro-life. Friends recalled her zipping around Cambridge in a sporty BMW, an earnest and fun-loving young woman with an endearingly goofy side. She was sort of fascinated by the glamour of politics, said Clark Tucker, now a Democratic state lawmaker in Arkansas. A lot of people with the IOP, myself included, sort of are nerds with a reverence for American institutions. I would have said the same about her, which is the most heartbreaking part of this. He added, she was running for something the second she got here. And then we learned that she was interested in running for student body president, or at least of the IOP, and that she teamed up with somebody and they couldn't quite work out between them which one of them was going to be the president and which one was going to be the vice president. You remember this? But also the note along the way that the Institute's student presidency contests were hotly contested but not particularly ideological, that Pete Buttigieg had won previously, 2 years earlier. So again, more about the names and number of people who are currently involved in politics. And the number of these guys who apparently go on to electoral politics is pretty amazing. And the number of people who knew Elise Stefanik, and they all, as I just am imagining a whole class of Tracy Flicks, all saying they were going to run for president, basically. And then all ending up as elected officials somewhere, and then expressing their disappointment that one of their number had been a soulless person without principle or guidance, solely attracted to power. And you wonder, maybe they all are. Well, anyway, Miss Stefanik and a friend named David Caden, the polished son of a politically connected New York lawyer, decided to run together. I guess he hasn't made a name for himself yet. Stefanik believed she should be at the top of the ticket, but in the end grudgingly agreed to be Caden's vice president, a concession that left her bitter years later, adopting a quasi-populist platform. I thought this was kind of a dumb thing, too, right? You'd think you'd come up with a better platform. But I guess, apparently, the keys to the IOP student office at that point rested in the hands of the leadership, the president, vice president, and who knows whatever else they elected. But so this is how they won their election. We'll give keys to everybody, which is to say, just take the lock off, essentially. But whatever. That seemed to do the trick, and they won overwhelmingly. Later, a friend or a Harvard alumna introduced Ms. Stefanik to her boss at the White House, an official who ran President George W. Bush's Domestic Policy Council. Day after graduation, she moves on to Washington, moves to Washington as his new assistant. So that's where we got to. Ms. Stefanik was an adept networker in the way of many successful young Washingtonians. Older people had a tendency to see in her a younger version of themselves. Ugh. And after Mr. Bush left office and her law school plans fizzled, none of the schools that she applied to accepted her. But I'm sure she thought she was entitled to admission to Harvard, Yale, what other law schools might she have chosen? I don't know. Columbia, wherever else. But apparently no one would have her. So she translated her White House connections into a succession of opportunities. Good for her. With vague ideas about a revival of Mr. Bush's compassionate conservatism, remember that? Or an American version of Thatcherism, which is an interesting contrast, let's say. She persuaded several prominent Bush alumni to join the board of a new web magazine named American Maggie, I guess for Thatcher, and dedicated to promoting, quote, new ideas, new voices, and new types of candidates. The idea being her, I think. American Maggie lasted about 6 months, publishing a mix of syndicated columns and lightly polished essays by young conservative women in Ms. Stefanik's orbit. So that didn't go anywhere. In 2011, she became policy director for Tim Pawlenty, the former Minnesota governor running for president as a Tea Party-friendly lunch pail conservative. When the party nominated an altogether different candidate, the patrician ex-financier Mitt Romney, her Bush connections helped land her a job with his running mate, Mr. Ryan, an icon of the party's libertarianish wing. After Mr. Romney lost, Ms. Stefanik was hired by a Republican National Committee task force charged with figuring out what had gone wrong. The project, known as the Republican Autopsy, remember that, would call on the party to embrace comprehensive immigration reform, amnesty, as it was disparaged on the right, and as Stefanik would now call it, I'm sure. Stefanik, who served as an editor for the task force, was a strong advocate of including the immigration language. According to Sally Bradshaw, a task force member, I can't recall any time where Elise argued against being bold in that document, Ms. Bradshaw said. As she recalled, Ms. Stefanik was most involved in the passages that examined how the party could attract a more diverse electorate. More inclusive messaging would not be enough, the final report argued. The party had to run more women, like her, for office. Ms. Stefanik, as it turned out, had a specific kind of candidate in mind. And you'll never guess who fit that bill better than anybody. But that's the story of politics for you. I always, this reminds me of the story I, go back to, noticing that, when the Articles of Confederation were failing in the United States and they held what became the Constitutional Convention. Remember that the convention was supposed to revamp the Articles of Confederation, not replace them. But the delegates did in fact decide that the better option was to replace the thing wholesale and to establish a new government and a new way of electing representatives to fill the legislative branch and represent people in Congress. And curiously, the rules that they wrote for how to select such people and how many of them there would be and what sort of constituencies they would cover, curiously favored the election of themselves to this new Congress. And boy, were they excited to sell this new thing. And boy, were the people who had been members of the Continental Congress, as assembled on the Articles of Confederation, unhappy with the way that went. But it doesn't matter because the ratification of the new Constitution didn't fall to them. It fell instead not to state legislatures, but specifically to newly elected bodies, elected specifically for the purpose of considering and ratifying the Constitution in each state. Interesting that they did it that way instead. And interesting that Elise Stefanik lands a job in which she is directing RNC policy. This is the sort of candidate we ought to be electing instead, and it's exactly like me. Well, anyway, Next up, the North Country makeover. Now that she's running for office, she has to abandon her Washington, D.C. flittings about and become a North Country, a bedrock American again. Running for Congress would be her first reinvention. From staff member to principal, insider to outsider, Beltway striver to North Country native. As Ms. Stefanik prepared to run in New York's sprawling, largely rural 21st Congressional District, she took a job at her family's company, Premium Plywood Products, and moved to their vacation home in the town of Willsboro on Lake Champlain. Oh, we got an extra house for me to use as an address? Excellent, I'll take that. She told friends she would play down her liberal views on abortion rights and gay marriage by casting them as settled matters. She hired Mr. Romney's media consultant, who prepared a rosy-toned introductory ad heralding her, quote, return home to the North Country. Her campaign bio described Ms. Stefanik as a small businesswoman who works in North Country sales, marketing, and management. That's the job that her dad gave her at the company. She had been working as a political operative since her graduation in Washington, D.C. She came back home. She said, Dad, can I have a job at the company? He said yes. Suddenly she's running for Congress. He must have said, what happened to the job that I gave you? But he probably knew what her plans were. And now she said, I'm a small businesswoman. I'm in sales and marketing. I'm an independent small businesswoman. I've been running this small business concern for 15 minutes. And that's that. Well, okay. When one local reporter visited Willsboro for a profile, he couldn't find a single person who had either met or heard of her. And yet, here we are. The older, overwhelmingly male political class in the district did not immediately take Ms. Stefanik seriously. The candidate and her aides felt that local news coverage of her was hostile and nitpicky. But she had an instinctive sense of how to craft a soundbite and repeat it relentlessly. She had learned it at the Institute of Politics. Embracing the slogan, new ideas and a new generation of leadership. She logged thousands of miles on the road. She had ditched the BMW for a Ford F-150 pickup, of course, and boned up on local issues like broadband internet access and tick control. When the incumbent Democrat announced his retirement in early 2014, Ms. Stefanik's main challenge was defeating his previous opponent, a self-funding businessman in the Republican primary. Whatever resistance she may have faced in New York, the party's national establishment, fearful of Democrats' dominance among young voters, embraced her eagerly. Oh my gosh, the youngest woman who will ever have been elected to Congress, she's a Republican. We gotta have that. Good plan. Billionaires threw her fundraisers and put more than $1 million into super PACs backing her candidacy. Thanks, Citizens United. Smaller checks poured in from the former White House colleagues and college friends, conservatives and liberals alike. At the time, she was everything I agreed with, said Heather Grizzle, a friend and fellow Republican from her Harvard days. I was thrilled to help a friend who looked like she had a shot. That fall, at the age of 30, Ms. Stefanik became the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. The Institute of Politics brought her onto its board among the ranks of the politicians and leaders she had idolized as a student. In Congress, she joined a new, more diverse crop of young Republicans. Senior Republicans began to discuss her as a future House Speaker. She was profiled in Glamour magazine. It's a little bit of a weird thing, but okay. And told CBS she had been influenced to run by reading Lean In, the best-selling book by Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook. But she carefully turned down most national interview requests. I wanted to make sure that my first impression to my colleagues is that I am a workhorse, she would later explain. And I mean, good plan. In private, Ms. Stefanik already seemed to be thinking ahead. Not long after the 2014 primary, okay? According to records provided by the online forensics company Domain Tools, StefanikForPresident.com was registered by Alex Skatel, the co-founder of IMGE, a political consulting firm retained by Ms. Stefanik's campaign. Within days, the records show, the firm had registered or acquired 24 other Stefanik-themed web addresses, more than half hinting at a future bid for Senate or president. Ownership of the addresses was later hidden behind a proxy service. In 2017, local papers reported that persons unknown had registered StefanikForPresident.com and other Stefanik-related domains. At the time, a spokesman denied it had been Ms. Stefanik or anyone working for her, chalking up the scrutiny to desperate candidates and their partisan allies. I mean, I think they probably kind of had her dead to rights, but it was in her interest to deny it, and so she did. Wow. But it's interesting. Remember, she's only won her primary. She hasn't even won the seat in Congress yet, and she's already registering Stefanik for president. She hasn't made it to the Senate. She hasn't even made it to the House. But, yeah, I mean, it's smart practice. You don't want anybody squatting on that, but come on. Anyway, on to the next section, supporting the nominee. We'll read a little bit about this and then take our third break. When the Congresswoman appeared in May of 2021 on War Room, Stephen Bannon's popular talk show, the one-time Trump consigliere prompted her to tell listeners how she had always stood by Mr. Trump's side. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Whoops, sorry. There goes the music. I'm busy texting now, trying to explain to our production staff, who's not here as production staff today, what happened with the high schooler. But at any rate, we ran out of time. And now back to the story of Elise Stefanik and how weird she is. So we left her. She is now appearing on Steve Bannon's War Room talk show. And this is an interesting setup. So he asks her to tell listeners how she had always stood by Mr. Trump's side. Sure, why not? People in the audience need to understand. Need to understand this, Mr. Bannon said. After the release of the Access Hollywood and tape in 2016, in which the future president bragged about groping women, you had every opportunity to run like so many of the Republican establishment did at the time. Which, by the way, is what she did. But, you know, for Bannon's show, you just say, that's not what I did. I was always with him. Ms. Stefanik, then mounting her first bid for House leadership, wound up for the softball. I will never forget campaigning in 2016. Despite the media's obsessive Trump derangement syndrome, she said, she had felt the energy on the ground, had seen Mr. Trump's win coming, even if others had not. The media didn't get it. The establishment didn't get it. I was proud to be a part of it, and I was proud to be on that ticket. In truth, she had loathed Mr. Trump from the start. In August of 2015, she told a New York radio station that he, Trump, was insulting to women and that his candidacy would hurt the party's efforts to attract female voters. That December, at a friend's wedding in Australia, she made Mr. Trump the butt of an elaborate rehearsal dinner toast, according to 4 people who attended. Whipping out a red MAGA hat, she glared at the other guests with mock suspicion, warning them not to post pictures or videos of the speech online where they might get back to her constituents. Winding up, she placed the hat on the groom, a tech entrepreneur known for his socialist politics and friendly debates with Ms. Stefanik. Everyone laughed. Her spokesman denied it was a MAGA hat and said the toast did not mock Mr. Trump. Of course. That's what you have to say. Like many establishment Republicans, according to her former friends. Although, let me point out again, this is something I said yesterday when I read the first and second, I think, examples of this. Be cognizant, if you will, of how many times her spokesperson just has to basically deny some story that they're saying about her. Like, and many of them are about Trump and about her wishy-washiness about supporting him initially. No, it's all a lie. She was always on board. There are a number of times in here where a story that's very revealing is told, and her spokespeople just deny it and say it's a fabrication and it's anti-Elise and it's sexist to say so. It's just very interesting. So I guess this is another one. Where were we here? Like many establishment Republicans, according to her former friends, she thought Mr. Trump was too awful and ridiculous to be taken seriously, then watched with alarm as his campaign soared. She must have wondered at that point, like, did I waste my time at Harvard and the Institute of Politics and all this when you could just be a total idiot and be like, let's kick everybody's ass. Oh, it's working. I'm winning. Why did I even go to Harvard? What was the point of that? You might wonder. Well, anyway, she refused to endorse anyone before the New York presidential primary that April, leading Mr. Palladino, her future ally, to denounce her as a fraud and a Washington elitist establishment sellout. Around that time, she returned to Cambridge for an event celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Institute of Politics. Afterward, she and a dozen of her old crowd gathered at a restaurant to catch up. Ms. Stefanik said she planned to vote for John Kasich in the primary and could not possibly vote for Mr. Trump in the general election, according to people who were there, and suggested she might write in someone else's name if he became the nominee. Parentheses, her spokesman denied that account of the dinner. So, incident number 3 or 4 or whatever it is there. Ms. Stefanik skipped the Republican convention that summer, but Bannon was sure she was a supporter from early on, right? She skipped the Republican convention. When the Access Hollywood tape broke, she drafted a statement demanding that he drop out of the race, according to a person familiar with her decision-making process, before settling for a Facebook post calling his statements inappropriate, offensive, and just wrong. Her spokesman, parenthetically, said that it was never Trump outside consultants working on her campaign who had drafted the statements calling on Trump to drop out. A week later, after a local debate, she told the assembled news media that she was, quote, supporting my party's nominee, unquote. Then she dashed to her vehicle as her campaign staff physically blocked an Albany television reporter from following her. In text messages to friends after Mr. Trump won, she expressed shock and worry, not the exultation she claims today. Her revisionism still shocks those who have known her the longest and who remember the disdain she expressed for Mr. Trump back then. I suspect there are a lot of Republican members of Congress who take positions on Trump that they don't hold privately for their own political security or gain, said Mr. Tucker, the Arkansas lawmaker. Elise is the only one I know for certain who has. Next up, woman in the middle. Over Mr. Trump's first 2 years in office, Ms. Stefanik fought what amounted to a losing battle against her own ambition. She voted with the president most of the time, but against some of his signature initiatives, his tax cut, for example, and his attempt to free up funding for a border wall by declaring a national emergency. She co-sponsored legislation to provide a path to citizenship for Dreamers, the young immigrants brought to America as children, and registered high-toned disapproval of the president's attacks on, you remember the S-word, whole countries. Wrong and contrary to our American ideals, she wrote on Twitter. Her friends outside Washington would occasionally text her with praise after a tough vote. Getting a lot of negative feedback back home, she wrote to one of them after the wall showdown, but also some positive, so mixed. But I feel strongly it was the right vote. She began participating in a book about millennial politicians by a Time magazine journalist, Charlotte Alter, who cast Ms. Stefanik as a rising star determined to drag her party into the 21st century. I just think my generation doesn't want to see the extreme partisanship, she told the writer. Mike Conaway, a former Republican lawmaker from Texas who served with Ms. Stefanik on the House Intelligence Committee, described her as a diligent and hard-working member who would ask really good questions and ask really good follow-up questions. I guess he kind of liked her questions. But according to current and former friends, she felt increasingly frustrated and lost in the House, horrified by the behavior of her harder right colleagues and unsure of her place. As Mr. Trump's presidency unfolded, it was becoming more difficult to play the middle. Some of the high-profile issues on which she had positioned herself as a bipartisan leader, climate action, immigration, etc., had little traction in the Trump era. The president's base wanted revenge, not high-minded ideas. Mr. Trump set policy by tweet, not white paper. I mean, this is totally contrary to everything she learned and loved at the Institute of Politics. As the 2018 midterms approached, 2018, right? Ms. Stefanik's campaign took on a grim, joyless air. According to friends and advisors, she seemed brittle and unhappy. No longer a novice candidate, she dictated a hyper-local campaign, emphasizing her bipartisanship and focus on regional issues. Though Democrats took the House that fall, Ms. Stefanik won the largest margin of any Republican in New York, a seeming validation of her carefully calibrated approach. But it was bittersweet. She was a promising young lawmaker with a seat at no particular table, respected by her party's fractured establishment, but viewed with suspicion by its ascendant Trump wing. Still, the campaign had given Ms. Stefanik a glimpse of an alternate path. That August, she had appeared with Mr. Trump at Fort Drum, a major military base in her district, to mark the signing of that year's defense bill. With a Democratic wave approaching, Ms. Stefanik had fretted for weeks over whether and how she wanted him to appear, but ultimately lobbied hard for Mr. Trump's visit, according to a former White House official involved in the planning. At Fort Drum, Mr. Trump mispronounced her name, calling her Stefanik, not for the last time, and offered backhanded praise. What is this sort of backhanded praise? She called me so many times that he had dodged her calls, Mr. Trump told the audience. Ms. Stefanik gave a brief speech from behind the presidential lectern, lit for television, as she cited the bill's pay increase for soldiers and provisions she had written providing support for military spouses. That day made a powerful impression, according to people who know or have worked with her. The cheering crowd was a taste of being Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows for a day. Oh boy, said the former White House official, referring to two of Mr. Trump's staunchest House allies. More important, she had successfully maneuvered the power of the presidency, even if it was his presidency, behind a piece of her own agenda. It was a taste of the influence she had always imagined having. In the months that followed, many people sensed her impending transformation only as a kind of withdrawal. Eric Swalwell, the California Democrat serving with her on the Intelligence Committee, recalled that in their first years on the panel, they texted often about committee business. She took the Russia stuff seriously for a long time, Mr. Swalwell said, and then she just went dark. Always a happy warrior, someone who loved the debate and gave as good as she got, she now seemed cornered and defensive. She felt she was taking risks in criticizing Mr. Trump, even gently. But amid the polarizing fever of the Trump presidency, longtime friends were increasingly impatient with her cautious triangulations. In the summer of 2019, when Mr. Trump attacked the Baltimore district of a black lawmaker as a rat and rodent-infested mess, and urged 4 Democratic lawmakers of color to go back to where they came from, Ms. Stefanik called his comments denigrating and wrong, but balked at going any further. "I don't believe he's a racist," she told a North Country newspaper. A week later, she received a long email from her old Harvard friend, Ms. Yearwood Young. "I've been wanting to write this email for months, but have been holding out as long as I could, hoping you would redeem yourself at some point," she wrote. "You know he's racist, It honestly disgusts me that for political purposes, you will not only refuse to call it out, but actually state that he is not racist. So, tough words, right? Ms. Stefanik wrote back that afternoon. I am sorry that I have disappointed you, she said. She pointed out that she had among the more bipartisan records in Congress and asked her friend to respect their differences. I know how divided this country is right now. I hear it. I see it. I experience it every day. I receive emails like this on a daily basis from people, including some of our college friends, who shame me for not supporting President Trump enough, Ms. Stefanik wrote. She skirted the question of whether Mr. Trump or the things he said were racist, responding that supporting President Trump does not make voters or people racist. Their volley of emails took on a progressively bitter tone, as you can imagine. Ms. Stefanik said she had been called out by name on Fox News and radio repeatedly after voting for immigration reform and legal status for undocumented immigrants. She had been subject to violent threats. Strangers had followed her while driving. She sounded resigned. As long as I happen to be a Republican today, she wrote, that is unacceptable and immoral in your mind. They never spoke again. That October, after receiving a list of routine fact-checking queries from Ms. Alter, the Time journalist, Ms. Stefanik demanded, through an aide, to speak to Ms. Alter's publisher. The aide claimed that the queries reflected significant factual errors, according to emails Ms. Alter provided, but when pressed, identified only a handful of minor items, easily fixed before publication. They were trying to use my good faith effort to check the facts as a cudgel to stop a book they didn't want to be in anymore, Ms. Alter said. The book aligned with her earlier image, and she was making a transformation. Just weeks later, Ms. Stefanik made her move. The next section, she has become a star. Among those who have known her the longest, a question about Ms. Stefanik's ideological journey almost invariably draws a pause, a sigh, and a theory. Even now, many former friends and associates believe that she did not at first intend to travel quite as far as she did. I don't think that the plan was to become a MAGA star, Mr. Tucker said. Indeed, through most of autumn of 2019, as the Intelligence Committee examined allegations that Mr. Trump had threatened to withhold military aid unless Ukraine investigated Mr. Biden, she remained a minor player, attending fewer than half of the private depositions and asking questions at just 2. And remember how good her questions are, right? She closely watched the Democratic presidential debates, sometimes offering, through a friend working on his campaign, unsolicited advice for Mr. Buttigieg. Remember, one of, I guess, her early Institute of Politics heroes, because he won the presidency, the student presidency. Even weeks later, as she publicly defended Mr. Trump, she was mulling over other paths for advancement. She asked the friend whether Mr. Buttigieg might consider her for a cabinet job if he won the presidency. The friend, incredulous, told the Times the idea was never sent up the chain. Yet, as public hearings loomed that November, Ms. Stefanik lobbied for a bigger role. Like other Republicans, she felt that Democrats were abusing their power, forcing through one-sided rules for the impeachment battle. Her plan, she told one Republican friend, was to highlight the unfairness of the process. But she would not carry Mr. Trump's water. I will never defend Trump, she said. Parentheses. Her spokesman said that the notion that Ms. Stefanik had raised the idea of a cabinet job with anyone in the Buttigieg campaign was stupid and false, and that she never expressed reluctance about defending Mr. Trump. So you can see how easy it is to figure out what's really going on here. On the first day of the hearings, she led off Republican efforts to derail the hearing, attacking the panel's chairman, Representative Adam Schiff of California, for blocking Republicans from calling some witnesses. But as the hearing progressed, she did defend Mr. Trump. Addressing herself directly to the television audience, she waved away the president's efforts to pressure the Ukrainians. For the millions of Americans viewing today, the 2 most important facts are the following, she said. Number 1, Ukraine received the aid. Number 2, there was in fact no investigation into Biden. When the committee reconvened 2 days later, Ms. Stefanik again led the attack. With theatrical injections, deliberately breaking the Democrats' rules, she lured Mr. Schiff into calling his young female colleague out of order. "What is the interruption for this time?" she demanded. It's for being out of order. On the left, Ms. Stefanik became an instant target of hatred. Hollywood celebrities and liberal Twitter influencers attacked her relentlessly, dubbing her Trashy Stefanik and circulating a doctored picture of her supposedly giving the finger to a photographer during the hearings. Is that right? In a clumsily sexist tweet, ABC's Matthew Dowd suggested she had been elected only because she was a woman. But Fox ate up her performance, featuring clips through prime time. Mr. Trump loved it. "I know a lot about stardom," he said on Fox and Friends the following week. "This young woman from upstate New York, she has become a star." Ms. Stefanik's Republican friend, to whom she had pledged not to carry Mr. Trump's water, was not surprised. He had watched many Republican politicians grapple with the political incentives of Trumpism. All her life, Ms. Stefanik had streamlined herself for success. Finally, she had found the engine of her ascent. The farther she turned the dial, the more power and influence she would have. "So then the question is, what do you do with that dial?" said the friend. "You can say, I can embrace it all without going full MAGA." Ms. Stefanik chose differently. She just said, "Wow, she cranked the dial." I don't think she arrived at this issue set totally disingenuously. A little puzzling there. Next up, I've chosen my values. As the positive reviews rolled in, Ms. Stefanik seized the opportunity. On the day of the second impeachment hearing, her team activated a new account on WinRed, the small donor platform set up by Trump campaign veterans. She raised more in grassroots contributions in a week than she ever had over the rest of her congressional career, according to a Times analysis of campaign finance records. By the end of her first week of hearings, the team had prepared to unveil a new impeachment-themed fundraising site, FightSchiff.com, and to set out to have her booked on Fox to plug it. Ms. Stefanik marveled to friends at the flood of money. Contributions from her leadership PAC to other Republicans would quadruple by the end of 2020. And you know what that means. It means you get elected to leadership. With Trump's blessing, she could tap into a nationwide base of MAGA fans. Out of roughly $4 million she raised on WinRed this election cycle through late October 2022, just 4% came from her own district, according to a Times analysis of campaign finance records. Ever her own best advisor, Ms. Stefanik dictated the tactics and message. As she milked the MAGA base for money and visibility, she began articulating a new, almost passive conception of her role as Congresswoman, in which her job was to mirror her constituents, not take principled votes they might dislike. In 2014, her defenders have argued her district wanted a Bush-style Republican. In the Trump era, it wanted a Trump-style Republican. "There's no shift," said Mr. Pelleggi, the former campaign aide. "Who could say she was wrong if the voters said she was right? The discredited gatekeepers of the mainstream media, the small papers back home that fewer and fewer people read." Asked in a recent interview whether she had chosen her ambition over her values, she simply avoided the question. "I've chosen my values," she said, "and I've chosen my constituents." She moved quickly, and I think she means I've chosen to be led by my constituents in this. And again, what's the point of going to the Harvard Institute of Politics if you're just going to take a poll and say, I'll do whatever you guys say? She moved quickly into Mr. Trump's circle, readily accepting the compromises it entailed. In spring of 2020, she flew with the president on Air Force One to witness the SpaceX rocket launch from Cape Canaveral, Florida. Aboard the plane, according to a former White House official who was there, the president made a derogatory comment about the sex life of one of his most loyal and senior female aides. I wonder if that's Hope Hicks. Ms. Stefanik had once criticized Mr. Trump's demeaning comments toward women. Now she simply plastered a smile on her face. No one said anything, neither did I, the former official recalled. It was a sign that she knew who she was. Ms. Stefanik's spokesman denied the account, saying it, quote, never happened. In public, however, Ms. Stefanik's new political self was most obvious on Mr. Trump's favorite social media platform, where she began to favor his random capitalizations and conspicuous exclamation points. In the years since his first impeachment hearing, she has attacked political opponents or journalists as sick or sickening more than 36 times, a language she had never used before on Twitter, by the way, which is borrowed from the Newt Gingrich, Frank Luntz memo of the late 1980s on the importance of framing language, and that there are words that they wanted people to use when referring to Democrats versus words to use when referring to Republicans and Republican policies, and saying that they were sick or sickening was chief among them, by the way. As the 2020 elections approached, according to a Times analysis of Twitter data collected by ProPublica, Ms. Stefanik deleted a pair of tweets from that March praising Dr. Anthony Fauci, the public face of the federal COVID response. America hearts, that she had a little heart icon, hearts Dr. Fauci. She had written in 2021, with Dr. Fauci firmly established as a right-wing punching bag, she expressed a different view. Fire Fauci, she tweeted. Save Christmas. Makes so much sense. After Mr. Trump's election defeat, as he fomented a deluge of lies and conspiracy theories about cheating and voter fraud, Ms. Stefanik quickly fell in line. Mr. Trump had made his election lies a litmus test for fellow Republicans, and Ms. Stefanik was unwilling to fail it, even as election officials and judges dismissed or refuted almost every claim made by the president or his legal team. Repeating a string of already debunked assertions, she claimed that local officials had counted the votes of dead people, or tossed out procedures intended to prevent fraud, or illegally counted late arriving votes. Having lied to her own constituents, fanning their fears of a rigged election, she then claimed their suspicions as a casus belli. Or I should say belli, right, rather than belli, but belli. Tens of millions of Americans are rightly concerned that the 2020 election featured unprecedented voting irregularities, she said in an open letter to her district on the morning of January 6th. So she told them there's reason to worry. They worried, and then she pointed to the worry and said, all I'm trying to do is express their worries, you see. Good trick. That evening, after the Trump-inspired mob was cleared from the Capitol, she joined other Republicans to vote against certifying electors from Pennsylvania. The next day, she got a text from Mr. Tucker, the Arkansas lawmaker and Harvard friend. I cannot put into words how disappointed I am in you, he wrote. She had squandered a historic opportunity to fundamentally strengthen our country and democracy, he told her. You've done this all for what exactly? Disgusted, he joined hundreds of other Harvard alumni and students on a petition for Ms. Stefanik's removal from the Institute of Politics board. That really must have wounded her, but yeah. So did Ms. Grizzle, her fellow Republican, who had lived most of the year in Pennsylvania. One of the ballots Ms. Stefanik had tried to invalidate was her own. You can't promote democracy if you're throwing out people's votes, Ms. Grizzle said. A few days later, the dean of the Harvard Kennedy School, which oversees the institute, asked Ms. Stefanik to step aside. What's she going to do? She's a Trumper, right? She refused, and when she refused, he announced her removal. She had disqualified herself, the dean said in a statement, through repeated false statements about the election. Ms. Stefanik responded with the kind of bristling performance her former friends had come to expect. Her alma mater had decided to, quote, cave to the woke left, she said. Getting kicked off the board was a badge of honor. And now, I think the end, I don't know if we're going to get to finish it, probably not, a fall and an ascent. A few weeks after the insurrection, House Republicans met to consider removing Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, then the party's highest-ranking woman in Congress, from her job as conference chair. In the two previous leadership contests, it was Stefanik herself who had stood before colleagues to nominate Ms. Cheney, once calling her a huge asset in the role. But Ms. Cheney had now voted for Mr. Trump's second impeachment, infuriating not only Trump allies, but a broader range of Republican lawmakers who complained that she had made their party look divided. Days after the vote, Politico reported that Ms. Stefanik had privately signaled her interest in replacing her. That February, Ms. Cheney's colleagues voted to keep her in the job, but as Ms. Cheney continued to speak out against Mr. Trump, the woman who had remade her principles to fit her ambition set out to depose the one risking career suicide in service of hers. Though Ms. Stefanik had a far more liberal voting record than the woman she wanted to replace, she worked both sides, making clear she would neither embarrass Republicans who had cowered before Mr. Trump's election lies, nor anger supporters who insisted on believing them. Her argument, as one Republican member recalled it, "I'm a woman, I'm young, I'm reasonable. I like Liz, but we need to quit focusing on January 6th. Mr. Trump's ringing endorsement that May sealed the deal. Cheney was out and Stefanik was in. It became harder then for her to reconcile the identity she said she hadn't abandoned with the power she had finally grasped. She dropped her support of the Equality Act, a bipartisan bill aimed at extending housing and employment anti-discrimination rules to gay, lesbian, and transgender people, and pulled her name from another Republican-backed gay rights bill known as the Fairness for All Act, saying she now had, quote, serious concerns on how this bill would impact society. She recently voted in favor of a bipartisan bill mandating federal recognition for same-sex marriages, though. Her voting score from the conservative Heritage Action was a squishy 24% at the end of 2018. She currently rates a stalwart 86. She has repeatedly voted against spending bills championed by Biden and the Democrats, then taken credit for the money that those same bills delivered back home. Last March, her press office alerted upstate reporters that Stefanik had secured $205,000 for job training in Warren County, though a news release from her Washington office, quoting the Congresswoman, proclaimed that she could not support Speaker Pelosi's bill, which was drafted in the dead of night.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, believe it or not, there's actually considerably more even of this long article. Whether or not we'll return to it, I don't know. I think we got to the meat of what's going on. And, of course, it's time now in an hour to start the show in the House. We'll see what happens with the speaker vote. Be back on Wednesday speaking to Greg and maybe even a makeup visit from Joan at that point. We'll see. See you tomorrow.